Carl Saff. I run a business called Saff Mastering here in Chicago. I've been doing mastering on and off for the past 8 years, since about 2000, and I've been full-time doing mastering for the past 18 months. The business started out as a part-time venture that I did in my spare time and has evolved into a full-time business, and I'm now happy to say I'm booking several weeks in advance. So the business has really taken off in the last couple of years, and I'm excited to be doing the work. This is the Requisite L2M MkIII. There's 3 of these units have been made. Obviously the Mark III is the third. It's been around for about 5 or 6 years. The designer lives in LA and is doing these all by hand. They're all hand-wired units. Really a brilliantly transparent optical limiter. It can also do compression. It can do 3-to-1 compression or 10-to-1 limiting. I tend to use it in limiting mode. It has a couple of very unique features. One is the limiter response curve, which basically allows you to have different frequency ranges trigger the limiting. If you have it set to the 0 setting, then it's using the full bandwidth of the mix to determine how it's going to limit the material. But if you put it at the +10 setting, for example, that's the furthest out it goes, it's triggering primarily off information in the high frequencies. And so, for example, if you have a recording with really brash cymbals or particularly SE vocals, you can use this setting, and then the limiter only becomes active when there's those really brash, harsh, high-end signals, and it kind of knocks them back a bit and makes them sit in the mix a little better. And that's a fairly common problem, especially with DIY home recordings. A lot of times people aren't aware of things aren't aware of just how harsh things like the S's in vocals or the brashness in cymbals is, either because of the room they're monitoring or the monitors they're using. It just escapes them or it slips through. And so that's something I can do to very subtly fix that problem. It's not necessarily a replacement for a de-esser or certainly an EQ, but it adds a nice subtle improvement in that regard that I frequently turn to this device to do that. In addition, it does analog limiting in more of a transparent fashion than any unit I've ever heard. It also has a very interesting feature, the limiter feedback feature. This adds selective amounts of even order harmonics to the program material, which is the same thing that happens when you run material through tube devices or track to analog tape. A lot of the niceness that people associate with those kinds of with analog tape and tube gear is the additional harmonics that are added and by those circuits. And this is a way to selectively add varying amounts of those harmonics to the program material. And to my ear, it definitely makes things like, especially harsh digital mids, sound a lot lusher than before. If you A/B, it's a subtle difference, but it reminds me of what you get when the difference, say, between tracking to tape versus to digital. It makes everything sound a little bit more the way a tape mix would sound. Just the mids sound that much lusher and not as hard and brittle sounding as people have come to associate with digital mid-range. Certainly digital mid-range is getting better all the time. Digital recording is getting better all the time. But whenever that problem rears its head, I always turn to the Requisite to try to add that little subtle niceness and lushness that that can be missing.